Welcome to Whispering Tombs, where the stories that linger in the shadows come to life. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments, and keep up with our latest horror-chilling stories. In the small, quiet town of Ghoulcrest, there was a house that stood out among the others. Isolated at the edge of the forest, the house had a dark history, but no one dared to speak about it. The Hannibal family had lived there for generations, but over the years, strange events began to unfold. It started with Richard Hannibal, a man in his mid-30s who was once a kind-hearted and well-respected individual in the community. But everything changed the night he came home from a camping trip in the woods. Richard had always been a nature lover, and the camping trip was something he looked forward to for months. However, when he returned, there was something off about him. His eyes were different, darker, colder. He moved with an eerie calmness, and a sinister aura surrounded him. He told his wife Sarah and their 2 young children that he had an experience in the woods, something he couldn't explain. But after that, nothing was ever the same again. At first, the changes in Richard were subtle. He started to avoid his family, spending long hours in the basement, working on something they couldn't see. Then, strange sounds began to echo through the house at night, scratching noises, low whispers, and the unsettling feeling that something or someone was watching them. Richard's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming in terror, only to fall silent the moment anyone entered his room. One evening, Richard invited his brother, Andrew, and his sister, Claire, over for dinner. Sarah had noticed Richard staring at them strangely, his eyes glowing with a hunger she couldn't explain. The dinner passed uneventfully, but that night, everything changed. In the dead of night, Sarah awoke to the sound of her children crying. Panicked, she rushed to their room, only to find the door locked. She pounded on it frantically, but the cries stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. When the door finally gave way, Sarah found her children lying lifeless on the floor, their eyes wide open in terror. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and there was no sign of Richard. Frantic, Sarah searched the house, only to find Richard standing in the basement doorway, a twisted grin on his face. His eyes were no longer just cold, they were dark, impossibly dark, as if the light had been drained from them. He spoke in a voice that wasn't entirely his own, a guttural, rasping tone that echoed through the walls. "The darkness has taken me, Sarah. It was always here, waiting. I was never meant to be free." Before Sarah could react, Richard lunged at her, his strength unnatural, his movements too fast for her to comprehend. He overpowered her, dragging her down the stairs into the basement, where the shadows seemed to swallow everything whole. As the days passed, the town of Ghoulcrest grew worried about the Hannibal family. Neighbors had not seen or heard from them in days. It wasn't until the local sheriff, a longtime friend of the family, decided to check on them that the horrors within the house were revealed. What the sheriff found was beyond comprehension. The house had become a slaughterhouse. Richard had killed everyone: his wife, his children, his brother, his sister, each death more brutal than the last. The walls were splattered with blood, and the floors were soaked in it. Richard's body was found in the basement, still standing, his eyes wide open and lifeless. But there was something inhuman about him. His limbs were twisted in unnatural angles, and his body was covered in strange symbols, as if something had carved them into his skin. The sheriff tried to call for help, but when he turned to leave, he found himself face to face with Richard Live, or something that resembled him. His body was impossibly contorted, his face a grotesque mask of death. The sheriff raised his gun, but it was too late. Richard was upon him, tearing him apart with inhuman strength. After the sheriff's death, the house was sealed off, and rumors began to swirl. Some said it was a curse that had taken Richard. Others believed it was something far more sinister, something that had been lying dormant in the woods, waiting for the right moment to claim its next victim. The Hannibal house stood empty for years, abandoned by the town, but every now and then, someone would claim to have seen a figure watching from the windows, and the air around the house would feel heavier than before. People would hear whispers on the wind, promises of death and darkness, reminding them that Richard Hannibal had never truly left. Some say his soul was consumed by the evil that had taken over him, and that it still lurks in the shadows of the house, waiting for its next victim. Others believe that Richard's spirit roams the woods, seeking vengeance on anyone who dares to step too close. The town of Ghoulcrest never recovered from the horror that had unfolded in that house. The name Richard Hannibal became synonymous with fear, and the house, now a crumbling ruin, remains a grim reminder of the darkness that can consume even the most innocent of men. And so, the legend of the possessed man who became a deadly serial killer of his own family and relatives, continues to haunt the town to this day. Years passed, but the shadows of the Hannibal family's tragedy never fully left Ghoulcrest. Whispers spread through the town about the cursed house, its dark energy still clinging to its walls, and how anyone who dared go near it would never come back. The horror that Richard Hannibal unleashed was etched deeply into the memories of those who lived through it, and the town tried to move on, pretending the past was buried. But some things are never truly buried. One stormy autumn evening, a group of young thrill-seekers, drawn by the dark legends of the Hannibal House, decided to challenge the town's superstition. They were unaware of the true depth of the horrors that lay hidden there. The group consisted of 4 friends: Jack, a self-proclaimed skeptic; Emily, an aspiring journalist; Daniel, an adrenaline junkie; and Chloe, who had recently moved to Ghoulcrest and was eager to prove herself as someone who wasn't afraid of ghost stories. They gathered near the old gates of the Hannibal property, the rusted iron bars creaking in the wind, and shared nervous laughs as they prepared to explore. "This is going to be just another empty house," Jack said, mocking the fear that had gripped the town for so long. "We'll take some photos, maybe a video, and then leave." But even as they stepped onto the grounds, an unsettling feeling crawled up their spines. The air felt thick, heavy, as though the land itself was suffocating under the weight of something ancient and malevolent. The house loomed in the distance, its broken windows staring at them like Hannibal eyes, and the walls were covered with creeping vines that seemed to move as though alive. The group hesitated, but their curiosity pushed them forward. As they entered the house, a chill settled over them. The wooden floors creaked beneath their feet, and the smell of decay filled the air. It felt as though the house was holding its breath, waiting for them to make the wrong move. Emily pulled out her camera, eager to document the history of the place. She began recording, narrating in her usual calm tone, but her voice trembled slightly as she passed the camera over the rooms. The once beautiful family home now appeared like a derelict tomb. The walls were scarred with deep dark stains, and strange symbols were scrawled in red too fresh, too deliberate to be the work of time alone. As they made their way deeper into the house, the temperature dropped, and their breaths became visible in the cold air. Chloe began to feel dizzy, her eyes clouding over with a strange, suffocating pressure. She tried to speak, but her words came out as whispers. It's not right. Something's wrong." Jack, the skeptic, brushed it off. "It's just the cold air playing tricks on you." But Daniel wasn't so sure. His heart pounded in his chest, and as they moved into the basement, he noticed the overwhelming silence. There was no wind, no distant sounds of animals, nothing. Just the sound of their footsteps, echoing like ghosts through the Hannibal corridors. The basement door creaked open slowly, revealing a darkened void. The moment they stepped inside, something, or someone, moved. They heard faint scratching sounds, like claws dragging across the stone floor. Emily froze, the camera slipping from her hands as a shadow passed in the corner of her eye. "Who's there?" Daniel called out, his voice trembling despite his attempt to remain brave. The group stood motionless, waiting for a response. The temperature seemed to drop even further, the cold biting at their skin. Then, from the shadows, a voice guttural and almost unintelligible, like it was coming from deep beneath the earth. "Leave, now, or you will be the next." Suddenly, Richard Hannibal's image appeared before them, his twisted, decayed face barely recognizable, his eyes sunken and lifeless but glowing with an otherworldly light. His movements were jerky, unnatural, as if his body was no longer his own. His skin was stretched and cracked, revealing grotesque symbols carved into his flesh. The light in his eyes was not the soul of a man, but something far darker, malevolent force that had possessed him completely. The group backed away, but Richard moved toward them, his footsteps echoing like thunder. The air grew heavy, thick, with the stench of decay and the foul odor of death. Emily screamed as Richard's hand reached out, touching the floor with long, bony fingers, dragging a trail of blood across the ground. A faint, eerie laughter began to echo around them, coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Then they heard it, a low growl, the sound of something deep, unholy, stirring from the depths of the earth. Something was waking up, something that had been trapped for years. Chloe, paralyzed with fear, was the first to break free of the trance that Richard's presence had cast upon them. She turned and bolted toward the stairs, but as she ascended, a voice filled her head, her mother's voice, calling her to stop. She froze, caught in a web of confusion and fear. Something was controlling her thoughts, pushing her forward, or pulling her back. Daniel, seeing what was happening, rushed to Chloe's side, but before he could reach her, he was tackled by an unseen force. He screamed as his body was dragged across the floor, the sound of tearing flesh filling the air. Jack and Emily, horrified, could only watch in terror as Richard's possessed form loomed over them, now less human than ever. He spoke again, but this time, his voice was a blend of several voices, distorted, demonic, otherworldly. Your souls will join the darkness. There is no escape. It was as if the house itself had come alive, feeding on their fear, pulling them deeper into its embrace. Emily rushed to grab her camera, but as she did, the screen flickered, showing images of Richard Hannibal's family, their faces twisted in agony, their eyes wide with terror, their mouths frozen in screams. The ground trembled beneath their feet. The walls seemed to close in around them. The house was alive. The last thing Emily saw before the darkness overtook her was Richard's grinning face. And then everything went black. When the local sheriff arrived the next morning, there was nothing left but shattered remnants of the house and the echoes of screams that had once filled the night air. No bodies were found. No evidence remained. Only the whispers continued, flowing through Ghoulcrest, telling the story of the possessed man who had become a serial killer, and how the house continued to hunger for more souls waiting patient for its next victims to come to close. And some say on certain stormy nights, you can still hear the sound of footsteps echoing through the darkened woods, as if someone is searching for their way home. Forever trapped by the darkness, Richard Hannibal had awakened. Years after the horrific events in the Hannibal House, the legend of Richard Hannibal continued to haunt the town of Ghoulcrest. The sheriff had long retired. The new generation of townspeople no longer feared the house, though most of them steered clear of the forsaken property. However, there were always those who would challenge the stories, driven by curiosity or arrogance. One such person was Lucas, a man in his late 20s who had moved to Ghoulcrest in search of his family's roots. He had heard about the Hannibal House. He believed the entire story to be a fabrication and exaggeration of small-town gossip. Lucas had no reason to believe in ghosts or curses. But there was one thing he did not know. His great-grandfather had been a distant relative of Richard Hannibal. The Hannibal family's dark past was something Lucas had never fully understood, until the night he decided to visit the house. The town had warned him, told him stories, offered him advice, but Lucas was determined to uncover the truth, to piece together the scattered history that connected him to the infamous family. Armed with a flashlight, a journal, and a sense of invincibility, Lucas ventured into the Hannibal property under the cover of night. As he stepped through the iron gates, the air felt thick, heavy, even more so than when the thrill-seekers had entered years before. It was almost as if the house were waiting for him. The wind howled around him, but the silence inside was suffocating. The Hannibal House was more than a decaying structure. It felt alive, breathing, watching. Lucas's footsteps echoed on the creaky floorboards as he entered the house. He wandered from room to room, searching for something, anything that could explain what had happened to his relatives, to Richard. The walls were covered in stains, remnants of the horrors that had unfolded here. The symbols, now faded and worn, were still visible in places like tattoos carved into the house's skin, an ancient curse that refused to let go. As he moved toward the basement, Lucas's heart began to pound in his chest. It was as if something deep beneath the house was calling to him, pulling him forward. And when he finally reached the basement door, it was as though the house itself was holding its breath. He stepped down the stairs, the weight of each step pushing down on his chest, the cold sinking into his bones. The moment Lucas entered the basement, he felt it. Something shifted. The air grew even colder, as though the house had woken from a long slumber. His flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, the shadows seemed to move. He shook it off, telling himself it was just his nerves. But deep inside, he could feel the presence of something darker, something ancient. As Lucas ventured deeper, he found something he didn't expect, an old wooden chest, buried under rubble. Curiosity overtook him, and he carefully pried it open. Inside, wrapped in tattered cloth, was a collection of journals, Richard Hannibal's journals. Each one was filled with the ramblings of a man who had descended into madness, his handwriting growing more frantic and disjointed with every page. It was clear that Richard had not been merely possessed. Something far worse had happened to him. He had made a deal, a dark pact, forged in the woods during that ill-fated camping trip. Richard had summoned an ancient entity, something that had lain dormant for centuries, hidden deep in the earth, feeding off the fear of the living. As Lucas read on, he learned the chilling truth. Richard Hannibal had not just been a victim of possession, he had willingly become the vessel for an ancient demon, a creature of darkness who fed on human souls. The family members he had slaughtered, they were sacrifices drawn into the abyss by Richard's own hand. But the worst revelation came when Lucas stumbled upon a final, cryptic entry. The darkness will never leave me. It has taken me completely, but I will find a way to return. I will rise again, and it will be through my blood. My bloodline will carry the curse forever. A cold shiver ran down Lucas's spine as he realized the significance of these words. His bloodline, his own family. Suddenly, the room seemed to close in on him. The temperature dropped, his breath becoming visible in the air. He turned, and there, standing in the shadows, was a figure, a man with Hannibal eyes, twisted in grotesque proportions. Richard Hannibal stood before him, but it wasn't him. It couldn't be. The man's body was grotesquely contorted, his limbs bent at unnatural angles, and his face was a mask of pure malevolence. The thing that stood before Lucas was not Richard Hannibal, it was the demon, wearing his skin. You're the last of my bloodline, the creature growled, its voice a terrible mixture of Richard's and something far darker. And now your soul will be the final offering to the darkness. The curse. It will live on through you. Lucas tried to run, but the air around him thickened, like an invisible hand gripping him, holding him in place. His heart raced as the demon Richard's twisted form approached him, its cold, lifeless eyes burning into his soul. In that moment of terror, Lucas understood. The house, the curse, the slaughter, it was all part of the demon's design. Richard had not been the only victim. The demon had manipulated him, drawing him in through his bloodline, allowing him to carry out the killings, to bring the curse back to life. And now, it had come full circle. Lucas was the final link in the chain. The demon reached out a skeletal hand and placed it on Lucas's chest. He could feel the ice-cold fingers pressing into his skin, the darkness seeping into his body. Pain shot through him as his vision blurred, his body trembling under the pressure. He could hear whispers, the voices of the Hannibal family, screaming for help, their souls trapped in an endless void. And then, just as Lucas thought he couldn't endure anymore, the pain stopped. The darkness withdrew, leaving him gasping for breath. The demon Richard stepped back, a twisted grin spreading across his face. You are mine now, the creature said, its voice a low, rasping hiss. You will carry out what was started. The bloodline is eternal. Suddenly, everything clicked. The truth, the plot twist that had been hidden all along, was far worse than anything Lucas had imagined. Richard had not simply been a vessel for the demon. He had been chosen to bear the curse that would pass from generation to generation, a curse that would feed the demon's hunger for eternity. And now, Lucas had inherited it. The last thing Lucas heard before the darkness claimed him was a chilling whisper from the depths of the house, as if the walls themselves were speaking. The Hannibal name will never die. In the years that followed, the town of Ghoulcrest began to notice something unsettling. There was a new presence in town, Lucas Hannibal, now a quiet and solitary figure. The rumors started again, whispers about the curse, about the man who had somehow come from nowhere. The Hannibal House remained abandoned, but the darkness was far from gone. People who came too close to Lucas, those who became his friends, began to disappear. They vanished without a trace. Their souls claimed by the same darkness that had taken Richard Hannibal so long ago in the town. It grew darker, haunted by the echoes of the past. For the curse of the Hannibal family was not something that could be destroyed, it was something that would live on forevermore.